The passenger wind carried dust and the thin, sharp promise of rain when Eli Harrow rode into Red Willow. He had meant only to replenish his stores, coffee, thread, a sack of flour if he could spare the coin, and perhaps find a warm bowl of stew at the general store before the next stretch of trail. Instead, he found a sight that set every bone in his body on an alert he hadn't felt since the war. A makeshift auction in the muddy courtyard behind Harrigan's trading post, men clustering like crows around a single, small human shape. She was standing on a splintered crate, wrists bound with rope that had once been clean but were now frayed and dark with grime. Her dress was threadbare, the hem torn and stained. Her hair hung limp around a face too young for the lines that hardship had etched there. Someone, or many someones, had decided she could be sold to the highest bidder, and they joked and spat as if they were buying a sack of feed rather than a breathing person. 20, called a grizzled prospector with tobacco staining his teeth. 30, another barked, eyes glittering with that same animal calculation. A man at the edge of the circle laughed and slapped a thigh, as if the scene were a sport. From the shadows of the post stepped a man with a gait like a drunk on bad balance. His shirt smelled faintly of stale liquor and stale lies. He wore the easy cruelty of someone who had learned to persuade himself of his own righteousness. "Come now, gentlemen," he slurred. "She's good for chores, learnable. Perfect for a washing and mending girl." Eli sat up a little higher in his saddle. His face had been weathered by sun and wind, etched with a quiet that told more of restraint than of age. His hand rested on the leather pouch at his hip, his last savings, meant for winter feed and a new pair of boots. He watched the woman on the crate. She kept her gaze low. The world narrowed to the fear that had kept her alive. How much to make them leave her be? Eli's voice slid across the courtyard like a blade through cloth. The man who'd been passing the coins blinked and squinted toward the newcomer. "What's that? You coming to bid?" A few men turned their heads, part curiosity, part the Sunday cruelty of the idle. "Name a price, I'll pay it, everyone walks away, and she goes with me." Eli's tone had no flourish, only a decisive calm that made a murmur go through the crowd. Silas Crow, the so-called guardian, whose breath smelled of rot and whiskey, let a slow grin spread across his face. 50, he said, like it were a joke, but he expected it to be taken as business. Eli reached for his pouch without hesitation, and the silver rang into the mud like a promise being cashed. Coins were not easy to spend for him, but he had a way of measuring the worth of things beyond the coin. He dismounted with deliberate care and approached the woman as if tending to a skittish mare. He drew his small knife and, without show, cut the ropes, fingers steady and gentle. "My name's Eli Harrow," he said softly. "I have a small place half a day's ride from here. You can come with me, or I'll take you where you please. It's up to you." She lifted her eyes and for the first time in weeks, maybe months, met another person's gaze. There was no calculation there, just the brittle hope that comes when the world has been pared down to its last, fragile splinter. "I have nowhere else," she whispered. Her voice had been unused for so long that it seemed afraid of the air. Eli helped her onto the pack horse with hands that had known work and sorrow. The town dissolved behind them in the gray morning haze as they rode toward the valley where the Harrow place sat between two pine-bellied hills. The sun finally broke through the mist and turned everything to gold. Still, she kept her head lowered, as if daring herself to believe that something so small as kindness might be real. The Harrow cabin was modest and square-jointed, a thick chimney of stone and a wide porch that had once been decorated with flowers. Someone's dream of civilization that the porch had outlived. A fence enclosed a small field, and a barn sagging the right amount, so you could tell it had been mended more than once by hands that cared. "It'll do," Eli said as he helped her down. "It's quiet. It's safe." She looked at the corral, the soft pile of hay, the garden rose that betrayed the patience of a single man's tending. Inside the cabin, the quilt on the bed had been stitched and restitched until its seams were stubborn as faith. A cot had been placed opposite it, straw, fresh, and smelling of clean lavender. Eli made no pretense of hospitality beyond what he could offer. He took the bed, he told her, because he liked the porch and the sleeping under the stars. She could take what warm shelter a home offered. "Why do you do this?" she asked, voice hoarse with caution and curiosity both. "Why give up coin for a stranger?" Eli's fingers found the faded brim of his hat. He took a breath like a man reaching for an old bruise to see if it still pained. "My wife died 3 winters past," he said. "Didn't mean to. Fever took her before I could do anything but hold her hand and watch the life leave her. I couldn't save her then. I can try to do right by someone now." Night stretched warm and small around her as she lay in that bed. For the first time in a long while, the night did not demand submission. No one demanded that she perform or apologize for her existence. Eli did not pry. He moved about the room with the quiet of someone who had long ago learned that the simplest kindnesses, a bowl of warm stew, bread that smelled of hearth, could be scaffolding for a mind broken by cruelty. The days turned into small rhythms. She learned the cadence of the place, the slow thud of the axe in the yard, the restless whicker of the mare, Eli's soft humming when he pored over small repairs. He gave her chores when she asked, and when she scrubbed the floor to the point of roughness, he would simply say, "You don't have to earn your keep," as if keeping her was a decision he had already made. That phrase, simple and unmagnanimous, felt like a seed planted in ground that had been trampled flat by fear. "Some days I forget how to be still, Mara." She gave him a name one evening, the first he had asked for, confessed while rinsing a pan. Her hands were steady, but there was a tremor in her breath. "Being still is not weakness," Eli said. "It's a part of healing." She listened to him, and in that listening, she began to try new things, humming while she weeded, coaxing a skittish filly into the stable, learning how not to flinch when strangers passed the fence. Each small victory conferred a new sort of courage, a patience where before there had only been survival. 3 months after Mara arrived, trouble rode up the trail. It came in the form of Silas Crow with a band of men heavier booted than the ones in Red Willow, men with the look of those who'd spent too long doing what they could without regard for law or conscience. Silas had sobered just enough to remember that selling a person had been profitable, and he had come to claim what he insisted on claiming. Eli met them in the yard, a rifle propped against his shoulder but not leveled, his posture a wall of calm steel. "You got your money?" Eli asked flatly. Silas spat and laughed. "You think you can buy what's mine and call it done? That girl belongs to me. She owes years, and we have the paper for it." The thin man Silas had with him fanned a document like a stage player flaunting a prop. But Mara did something that surprised everyone. She stepped out onto the porch, not as a trembling thing, but as a person who had come to believe she could speak. "I don't belong to anyone," she said. "Not to you, not to that paper. I choose to stay." Silas's face twisted at her insolence. "You get back down here, you insolent—" "You don't get to choose for me," Mara replied, her voice gathering the heat of the months she'd spent learning that her life mattered. It was not a roar, it was a kind of steady steel. Eli watched her and felt something in his chest unclench, as if she had reached through him and loosened the band of grief that had kept him closed. For a moment, no one moved. Men check their odds. Sometimes they back down when faced with certainty. Silas, however, cared little for moral arithmetic. He spat accusations and flung old claims and legal-sounding nonsense in a voice smooth as smoke. "Paper or not, she's my sorrow to manage." Eli's voice cut the air. "If you want to take her from a place where she learned how to sleep without trembling, you'll have me to go through, and I'll not make it easy." Threats hung heavy. The men fidgeted, their hands close to gun hilts. Then, as if someone had spoken an unspoken truth, Silas's entourage shifted, the glint of reluctance touching even the most hardened faces. Maybe the sheriff would not want to be asked to carry a burden of taking a person back into a system that smelled of cruelty. Or maybe men, even those who trafficked in other souls, are wary of an old man who looks them straight in the eye and will not blink. Silas remounted with a curse and a promise that this was not the end. He rode off, the dust swallowing him and his shadow like a bad memory. The quiet that followed was a kind that could be kept if guarded. Mara collapsed onto the porch steps with the kind of sob that is not loud but deep and cleansing. Eli sat beside her and said, "You were brave." "I was terrified," Mara admitted. "Being brave doesn't mean you're not terrified," Eli said. "It means you keep going anyway." As the seasons unrolled, Mara's strength continued to reform like tempered steel. She learned the land with a hunger to belong, the soil under her nails, the taste of new vegetables from their small patch. the pride when a gate swung true because she had fixed it. She asked about Eli's wife often, in small, careful inquiries. "Tell me about her," she would say, and Eli's face would cloud with the memory of a smile that had once cut through winter like a blade of sun. "Her name was Liza," he said to Mara once, the first time he spoke of the woman whose memory he had wrapped tenderly inside his chest. She laughed too loud and knitted like her hands were making safety. "She died giving a child life that didn't take. I couldn't get them back. I thought I had nothing to give after that. Then I saw you on that crate. I don't know why I did it. Maybe because saving you saved a small part of whatever I thought I'd lost." Mara listened, and in those evenings by the stove, the space between them softened, not with the sudden blaze of a town romance, but the slow building of something like trust. She laughed sometimes, a soft, almost surprised thing. The sound made Eli look up from his work with a smile that had been dormant for too long. Then one summer morning came like a knife of heat and a cloud of dust. Silas returned, not with a ragged band of hirelings, but with a warrant and a man in a neat black suit, badge pinned like a polished star. The sheriff's voice had the steady boredom of someone who'd been called to too many disputes. Yet there was an edge in it. "I have a warrant for theft and harboring stolen property." Eli stepped between Mara and the men, rifle a measured presence. "What property?" he asked. The sheriff indicated Mara. "She's the subject of a claim, bonded labor, legal." Mara's voice was clear and sharp as steel. "It's a forgery. My family never made me someone's property." Silas snarled. "You're talking back, are you? You belong to me until debts are cleared." "You conned me with this," Mara said. "I slept in a stall while you took the good blankets. You called scraps living. You beat when you felt like it. What debt could possibly account for that?" The sheriff, who'd so far chosen to tilt the law to the slant of what looked official on paper, felt the tilt of something else. He unfolded the document that Silas had handed him and studied the ink and the signatures and the dates. He asked questions that a man with a clear badge was supposed to ask. Who witnessed the original? Which court filed it? Was there a chain of custody? Silas's answers were artless, full of gaps and glints of improvisation. The more he spoke, the less the paper looked like a legal instrument and more like a stage prop for a confidence man. The sheriff's posture softened into something like skepticism. When the law looked carefully, it sometimes found the truth already waiting there. The sheriff folded the paper and handed it back to Silas. "I can't enforce what I don't believe is legal," he said, flat as a stone. Silas's face reddened with a fury that felt exhausted. He lashed at the air with a crude whip. The leather snapped, a sound like a final attempt at intimidation. Eli's rifle barked once, the report a sharp punctuation that broke the whip into shreds and tore a neat hole through Silas's hat. The sheriff's men faltered. Men who traded on the terror of others always looked for the easy exit, and tonight there was none. Silas rode off with a string of curses that the wind swallowed. The men who'd come for easy money followed like a tide retreating. That evening, the world seemed to exhale. Mara and Eli sat on the porch, no longer master and saved, but two people who had chosen to remain tethered to one another, in something like agreement. "What happens now?" Mara asked, hands resting on the rifle across her knees. She asked the practical question because she had been carved by a life that required practical thinking. "Will people come again? Will we need to leave?" "We live," Eli said simply. "We plant. We fix the fence. We keep our eyes open. If folks come, we'll deal with them." His voice had the hard patina of someone who had learned that life is mostly a string of small, stubborn acts. "And you?" Mara asked, searching his face with a careful tenderness. "Why me? Why spend what you had left on a stranger?" Eli turned his gaze toward the hills. "Because I couldn't watch someone else suffer and do nothing. Because I wanted to try to do something right in a life that had mostly been about holding on." They began to plan in small, brave ways. A deeper vegetable patch for winter, a lean-to for the mare, a little shelf in the kitchen where Mara kept a jar for coin. They talked about things that once would have seemed beyond imagining. Child's name, though neither of them dared more than a hypothetical, the past had been merciless. A trip into town to trade, a future where storms were things to prepare for rather than fear because hands were sure and help was at hand. Seasons measured them. Mara learned to sleep without flinching. She learned that love does not always arrive like a fever. Sometimes it arrives as daily bread. She learned how to plant a row of beans and how to read the weather in the way the pines sighed. She taught Eli a song she remembered from a woman who'd once hummed it when folding blankets in a house she barely recalled. He spent evenings pretending he wasn't listening, and then, alone by the stove, he sang the melody back to himself like a benediction. Months turned, and in the slow quiet of an autumn evening, Mara reached for Eli's hand, with no thought of debt or obligation, only of wanting to share warmth. He took it with calloused fingers that had learned to be gentle. "You were never broken," he said. "You were bent by what you endured. You learned to be more than they let you be." Mara smiled at that, a small dawning. She had once thought gratitude might be the only feeling she could offer. Now she learned the dangerous, glorious thing of liking a person for who they were, rather than for what they'd done for her. It was a small revolution after a life of being demanded from. They were not naive. They kept watch. They kept the rifle cleaned and the gates mended. They wrote a line in a ledger every week. Seed bought, goods sold, days when someone came by with news of the road. But they also planted a fig tree near the porch and watched it steady itself into green. In the spring, it produced fruit small and sweet, a proof that patient hands make gentle things grow. Years later, when the pines had grown a little taller and their shadows a little thicker, Mara and Eli would tell the story of the crate behind Harrigan's to young folk who came through the valley. Not as a tale of triumph, but as a reminder. The world will sometimes choose cruelty because it is easy, but there will also be people who will choose otherwise, even when they have no duty to do so. For every Silas who sees the worth of a person as coin, there is an Eli who sees it as a life. If this story touched you, if it reminded you that dignity can be reclaimed and that healing often starts small with a single act of decency, stay with us. Subscribe for more stories that trace the slow, stubborn rise of people who build second chances out of broken pieces. Share this tale with someone who needs a reminder that courage and kindness can change the course of a life. And if you want to support more stories like this, consider following our channel. There are many more quiet reckonings waiting to be told. Want more? Subscribe, share, and come back for the next story about ordinary people making extraordinary choices. Your attention keeps these stories alive.